Now we are asking, is inheritance tax unfair? The amount collected by the Treasury soared by 8% to a record high of £5.7 billion. That was between April and December last year. But some Tory MPs are calling on the Chancellor to reduce the tax or even just scrap it altogether. Now, only 1 in 25 estates currently end up paying it. It's charged at 40% and it's payable on estates over the value of £325,000 or £500,000 if you're going to pass it on to a direct descendant. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt called the tax pernicious, while former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says it's inefficient and should be abolished. So we're asking, what do you think? Should we scrap it? Is it a good idea? Maybe you think it could win the Tories some votes, or does it simply just make the rich richer? You can give us a call 0207 862 2222 and we'll speak to you in just a moment. I'd like to now bring in business journalist Adam Shaw. I don't know why that was such a tongue twister, but anyway, Adam, thank you for joining us. Now, if you could just lay out for people that don't know what inheritance tax is and who it affects.
So you laid out a lot of the detail right there in your introduction very well. So in simple terms, it's a very clear tax. It taxes the money you leave after your death. The moral imperative behind it is the feeling that why should your children or your relatives benefit from your work rather than the sweat of their own brow? And that can be seen as important because we have very low social mobility in this country. If you're born into a poor, disadvantaged family, you are likely to remain like that as an adult. And, of course, if you inherit lots of wealth, you can do well, nothing to do with you. So there is a sort of moral argument going, maybe we should tax people less, but only if they've worked, not because their parents worked. So that's roughly how it works. And
it affects everybody who has an estate over £325,000?
Yes and no. Right. So everyone is potentially affected by this. Only 4% of people actually pay, but it's a hugely emotive issue for understandable reasons. Not only is it dealing with death, but you feel, well, I spent my whole life working hard. I want to be able to help my family. That's a good thing, isn't it, to help your family? So it is a very emotive issue. The problem that I think a lot of people see in this is that actually, if you're super wealthy, there are loads of ways of avoiding it. So the very people you want to target with this tax actually find ways of avoiding it. And I can go through they're not particularly complex.
We'll go through them in just a moment. I just want to get a quick reaction from the panel. Generally, how do you feel about inheritance tax, Wilfred? Do you think it needs to be scrapped?
I absolutely think they should be scrapped because I'm one of those guys, you know, Windrush generation, a poor boy done well, and all the hard work you do is to try and to give your children some advantage in life. That's the whole point about having children. So,
but surely you already will have done that through your hard work.
Well, the hard work is so they don't have to work as hard as I do. You know, that's the whole reason for having children, is that their lives are going to be better than mine. And so if you can't give them that, what is the point? That you're suddenly, that's going to be taxed and then they've got to start right back at the beginning again.
So, Ava, Wilfred's argument is you're taxing aspiration.
Well, I mean, you're taxing aspiration up to £500,000. I'm sure that's enough to hand over to your children, isn't it? That's quite a considerable amount.
Not much in this day and age,
right,
I'm telling you, it doesn't go very far.
OK, so we're coming up to the spring budget. Jeremy Hunt's probably got about £10 billion of headroom to play with, and that's going to be the cost of abolishing inheritance tax. You know, it's about £8 billion to abolish inheritance tax. Now, if you are a constituent or a voter right now, do you care that a bunch of wealthy people are going to have to pay a bit of extra inheritance tax, or do you care about pushing that money into nurses' salaries, into local amenities, or into something that you can actually use? I just think it's a pretty irrelevant tax. I'm sorry, I'm happy you've done well, but you should pay for it.
You say it just back to...
Well.
Yes.
You should pay for doing well. That
yes.
is... How is that then going to encourage people to do well in their lives? If you do well and then you're suddenly going to be taxed for it. And some people choose not to.
I work really hard and I like to think that I'm not doing too terribly, but I also I believe in the welfare state and I believe in the NHS, and if you want to have those things, someone has got to pay for it, and I'd rather it's not the people who are on 29k having to pay for it. I'd rather it's the millionaires.
I now have several questions for you, Adam.
Okay, right.
So Ava's made the assumption that everyone that's paying inheritance tax is very wealthy, from the wealthier end of society. But when we're talking about something, an inheritance over 325,000, we're talking potentially a family home over 325,000 that they will then have to pay tax on. Is that right? So is it only the wealthy that pay it?
Well, the problem here is you're talking about theory and practice. So you're right, and Wilfred, you're right. Certainly if you live in a big city, an ordinary home can well cost you more than £500,000 here. So we're not talking about people who live in mansions suddenly facing this. The reason that a lot of people don't end up paying it is because there are ways of giving away money before you die. So it's a very easy tax to avoid.
So if you give just on your deathbed, before you pass away, you quickly sign over all your worldly goods and then you don't have to pay inheritance tax?
You can't be going, not feeling very well this afternoon, have my house.
Yes.
You can't do that. There's something called a potentially exempt gift. You have to live, for starters, 7 years. So I could give you today £1 million.
If you would like to.
Which
Adam,
I do want
right.
to do,
Yep.
right? As long as I live for 7 years, you'll have a vested interest in this, I think, that would be tax-free. And if I live for 5 years, you'd be a big chunk of that tax. And that's why very wealthy people can give away £1 million. It doesn't affect them. Give it to your kids, give it to your friend, give it to your gardener, whatever you like. Live for 7 years. There is no inheritance tax to pay on that. So that's why people argue it's not so much the moral issue of this tax, it's actually it doesn't work. It's not doing what it says it's doing.
That was going to be my second question. So it's been a bumper year for the government in terms of inheritance tax. We've got 5.7 billion. They're paying 8 billion just to fix potholes in this country, which isn't even going to be close to enough. In terms of the Treasury income, how much is inheritance tax?
Well, I mean, we talked about how much inheritance tax. Look, it's not going to fix the problems in this country by fiddling around with inheritance tax. I think there are bigger issues here. One is it the right thing to be doing morally? And you talk about this. I think that's a really interesting and very widely held view. But I have a question for you about this. You say you built your own business, right? No advantages. But what you've asked for is to pass those advantages to your children. So in your argument, I don't mean to be confrontational about it, but it seems to me, in your argument, you're saying you want to sustain that disadvantage for your children's friends. And given your experience, I wonder why you feel that.
Yeah, but the thing that gives us purpose in our lives is how to make our children's lives better. Without that, what is the point of having children? What is the point of hard work? That's where it all falls down.
I suppose what Adam's pointing out or making it is, shouldn't we be trying to make the lives of all children in the future generations better?
You can't be responsible for everyone because everyone will have their different views or, you know, their different worth ethics. I mean, you can't say, you've got to be responsible for the rest of society.
But you would like to see schools, you know, properly funded and you'd like to see the welfare state continue.
But I would like to make my contribution to that when I'm alive. So that's how I'm helping the rest of society. But my ultimate responsibility are to my children.
But a lot of the problem as well is that the homes that you own at the moment, so homes have appreciated in value, I mean, extraordinary numbers. But, you know, the reason for that is because local government have put in good amenities, they've put in good schools, they've kept the roads nice.
Which I paid for, and there's a high tax rate, which I paid for.
You haven't put in as much as what has appreciated on your house. And so that is wealth that you haven't personally accumulated, that has been gifted to you. So you should give back in death.
Let's go to the calls. Sam from London, what's your thoughts on inheritance tax? Should we scrap it? Sam?
I think we should extend the scope, reduce the rate, and then in 10 years' time have a referendum. Because at the moment, it's
You've confused me there. You're going to extend it, so we're talking about reducing the threshold down from 325,000 to what, 100,000?
Whatever, yeah. Reduce it so more people pay it, so more people know about it.
OK, but Sam, that will mean that more people are going to have to sell a family home. That may mean quite a lot to them.
I also said reduce the rate, which you haven't picked up on. So reduce the rate.
Well, I do beg your pardon, Sam. I was trying to get through everything that you said initially. OK, what rate would you reduce it to then?
Well, I think, like income tax, it should probably be progressive. So I would start at something like 15%.
15%. So I suppose then if you had a house valued at 200,000, your threshold was 100,000, you're only paying £15,000. But who has that down the back of their sofa?
You get a mortgage, don't you? Like lots of children who want to hang on to the family home do at the moment. And
then your referendum would be on whether to keep it in that situation?
When enough people have actually experienced inheritance tax, then let's have a sensible conversation and let's have a referendum and not have party politics come into this and the politics of envy. Let's have people talk about a tax they know about.
OK, well, actually, maybe that's a fair point. Adam, first of all, a question to you. If we did what Sam is suggesting, would the government make more money out of that? Presumably so.
Well, it depends. I don't know if it's presumably so, because you'd have to work out the maths at what rate you're reducing it to and where it comes from. But I think Sam's point, your point here, is also about the equity of this. You say people should experience it because only 4% of people experience it and everyone has a view on it. So I think that is a really interesting, actually, approach to go, well, actually, if we think the principle is right, that you should tax inheritance, well, let's tax everyone's inheritance, but make it more progressive, because there is this sort of switch. You either don't pay it, or you pay a huge chunk of it.
Well, that's what I was just about to say. Actually, my maths isn't amazing, Sam, but the way you're doing it suggests that you'd actually be letting the wealthier off sort of scot-free, if that makes sense, because you would be reducing their rate from 40%, say, down to 15%, so they would have to pay a lot less than they would in the situation that it is at the moment. But very interesting point to make. Thank you very much for your call. Helen from Essex, what's your thoughts on inheritance tax? Should it be scrapped? I mean, it's only a quarter of people pay it.
I don't think it should be scrapped entirely, no, but I do believe the threshold should rise exponentially, really, because like the point was made earlier, most houses, I mean, I've lived in my house for 30 years, and what it's worth now is a ridiculous amount of money to what I paid for it. So I am in the major inheritance tax band.
OK.
And I'm a pensioner. I haven't got a lot of money, so all I've got is my property. So why am I paying so much inheritance tax?
Because you didn't earn it. You didn't earn that. That was
But that's not my fault. That's not my fault. I didn't earn it. If house prices hasn't risen, I'll give you another example. Whether I earned it or not, my son worked really hard. He died very young, and I had to go through the stressful time. But he also had to pay inheritance tax on his earnings of 40%. Now, that was a disgrace.
Sorry, did you inherit your son's wealth?
Well, he didn't leave a will. He was quite young. He worked hard. He died.
So you would have paid the inheritance tax if you were the beneficiary. It would have been you paying.
Yes, I paid the inheritance tax. Yes,
of 40%. But again, Ava's going to say your son earned that. It was his hard work that earned that money, and therefore, I suppose it's only fair for you to pay a little bit of tax on it.
But you see, the thing is, the super rich.
But he'd already paid tax
properties
on that money.
What? Sorry, Helen, what were you saying?
He'd already paid tax on that money.
Well, that's and that is the argument, isn't it? That actually we already have tax on income, and that goes up the more you earn. So actually, we're already taxing wealthy people, and this is just yet another tax we're going to
So
add on.
the point I was trying to make is this: is that everybody's trying to tax the super wealthy, but the super wealthy don't own their own properties. Most of the money is actually through companies a different way. So the people who suffer are the people in the middle.
But I would also add to that, how do you quantify what is hard work? Because would you say that just because you've owned your own business, you've worked extremely hard, but perhaps if you are a nurse, you've probably busted 14-hour shifts from the majority of your life, but haven't been able to reach the threshold of inheritance tax, has that nurse not worked hard enough?
No, but the point is the nurses will not be paid for if you don't have people creating business.
That's why we have inheritance tax.
And well, no, what you've got to do is that you've got to encourage people to go out and to create wealth. So we could actually... I'm
going to have to cut you off. You're making a compelling debate between the two of you, but unfortunately we ran out of time. Helen, thank you very much for your call and your stories as well. I'm sorry to hear about your son. Thank you very much. Adam as well for joining us and giving us the facts and figures involved in that. Thank you for all your calls. We're moving on after the break. Is marriage point...